Jesus Trilogy, Book 2, Then There Were Two, Chapter 8. And yes, the majority of our world does not believe in the one true God. It believes in the Roman gods or the Greek gods or Ra, the god of Egypt, or some other god. Some even believe in the devil himself and think that he is running our world. And by the terrible things I see taking place in our world, I'm inclined to agree with them. We had a true God. Why does he allow all of his crime and tragedy and war? Why doesn't he just save us all right now? The new head preacher was a young dynamic speaker named Stephen. His sermons were insightful yet easy to understand. Jesus marveled at how much a small town as Nazareth was fortunate enough to be given such a dynamic personality. He supposed Stephen's sermons are not only interesting but often interactive. Today was no exception. I think God is not capable of stopping all the world's tragedies. Some of the terrible things, such as war and vicious crime and abuse of children, just happen. No one can stop them. But God can heal hearts and minds. He can't tell the human mind, evil as it may be, what to do. But God is able to pick up the pieces, so to speak, and heal the human heart. Mary had stood during the sermon, was acknowledged by Stephen, and had spoken her mind. Jesus didn't necessarily agree with all she had said, but kept silent. He and Mary would have discussions for literally hours on various subjects, but in the end he seldom was able to change her opinion. It frustrated him because he knew he was right at least half the time. On this current subject he knew she was wrong. She would always accuse him of being a know-it-all and would disagree with him just for spite. Their deep feelings for one another would eventually heal any rift. They both were amazed at how much they really loved one another. I don't think we can limit God. He can do anything. After all, he created this world and us, didn't he? Jesus was saved by old Jaron, who had spoken up. He was a church elder and a fairly well-read person. Mary, do you care to respond? Stephen prompted. Yes, I would. She cocked her head in that sexy way that Jesus loved and said, if God has no limits, then how did the devil and sin get into this world? Any compassionate God would not have allowed sin to enter the world at all. And he shouldn't have created woman. This comment came from a young teenage Orthodox boy by the name of Boris sitting in the back of the church. People turned and snickered at the comment from this usually quiet teen. Please, people, remember we are in the house of God. With quiet restored, Stephen continued. Anyone else have anything to add? There was only silence now, so Stephen resumed control of the service. In my study at the seminary, I have come to the conclusion that God does have limits, but they are self-imposed. He created man knowing full well he was too weak and would eventually succumb to sin. But it was Satan who first sinned, Mary piped up. And God also created Satan, Jaron added. So why would God do such a thing? Mary asked aloud and then sat down again. She put her left hand on Jesus' right thigh and gave it a little squeeze. There was a little tension in her body and her voice. The squeeze seemed to release some of it. Jesus was the calming force in her somewhat tempestuous life. She knew she needed him, but she wasn't about to let him know it. Women must maintain their control over men, and she would do everything in her power to uphold that solemn female oath. I've not come up with the answer to that question yet, but when I do, you will be the first to know, Stephen said. Jesus had thought long and hard about this very question, but he hadn't come up with a satisfactory answer either. He had studied all the prophets. He had also begun to delve into Greek philosophy. It was fascinating. There were some great thinkers in that culture. He admired Plato and Aristotle. He didn't always agree with them, but he did respect their intelligence and thought processes. Certain of the Greeks could argue either side of an issue and win the argument. This talent fascinated him. How could they do it when there was only one correct answer to a given hypothesis? He wasn't certain, but he was beginning to suspect their technique involved making certain believable assumptions which were not exactly true. Then the debater would build his case based on that slightly untrue assumption and win the argument. His counterpart would be forced to capitulate, yet the counterpart insisting that his statements were true should prevail. But seldom was that the case. A lot of slightly false assumptions would end up in a true statement. Jesus realized that was just where this discussion was headed, but he bit his lip and squeezed his love's thigh in return while staring straight ahead. Time would save him this day. Dear friends, as you can see, this is a most complex issue. Stephen was a tall man with dark wavy hair. One of his locks fell over his left eye. Pushed it back, but it fell again. Pardon me. He turned and vigorously pushed it back again. It stayed partially out of place. As I was saying, we may not have all the answers, but we must trust our Creator. He is perfect and all-powerful. Our small human minds cannot understand Him and what He does completely. But He doesn't ask us to do that. He only asks that we believe in Him and do our best to live our lives exactly as He has told us in His oracle, the Ten Commandments. Mary thought, "But I understand it," she whispered to Jesus. "I don't like this guy. He's kind of a wimp. Not much courage, if you ask me." Jesus gave her a look of incredulity, then looked back at Stephen. His hair was covering half his face again. Let us close by singing number 291, David's Psalm. The entire congregation stood, opened their hymn scrolls, and let the melody drift heavenward. Jesus knew God would hear it.